Um, so myself, I'm currently working as an assistant professor at Global Health and Development Department at Taipei Medical University, which is under College of Public Health. I'm also digital health consultant and PI at ICHIT Center. If you knew about that, this is also under College of Medical Science and Technology at TMU. I'm also fellow of Australian College of Health Informatics, Australian College of Health Services and Management, and Royal Society of Public Health. Besides that, I'm also part of the international journals. So there's an international journal for quality in healthcare. You're all aware of that. It's from ISQA. It's an official journal from ISQA. And since I have been part of that, we took the journal from 1.5 impact factor and we brought it to 2.5 impact factor during my tenure. Now we are going to, hand over to the new EIC as well, but I'm still the deputy editor. So I was managing full-time this journal as well. Besides that, there was computer method and program in biomedicine journal. When we took this journal was also, impact factor 1 point something, and now it's 3 point above impact factor. And also there is a BMC in global health section. So the reason I want to tell you is because these all are from the different domains. So in quality in healthcare, then there's a computer method and program in biomedicine is more like related to the health informatics journal, and then there's a global health perspective. Because quality in healthcare is a kind of mixture. So whenever you go to the ISQA conference, you can also see there is a e-health, innovation, technology, and these kind of things are also coming into the quality in healthcare, patient safety as well. So do you know from where this picture is? Yes. So this is going to be this year in October, I think, yeah. Or 1 month ago, I think, something like that. So you are preparing for submitting your abstracts for this conference. So what is actually an abstract? So it's actually, single paragraph manuscript that can stand alone. If somebody can read your one summary of your paper, they can understand your whole study. The idea is about the abstract is that. And self-contained summary of work means it should be automatically tell you what you have done exactly, what was your objective and what it has been in the methodology and what were the results. So it's actually, in short, gives you, the significance. So the main thing is to demonstrate your ability to effectively communicate. Means not ambiguous. You have to have very clear and concise message to the audience. So the quality of your abstract, it determines whether, anybody will read your entire study or the above of your old manuscript later on or not. Because based on your abstract, people can determine your whole project, what you have done, your thesis, your, research paper. So if your abstract is not going to be very crispy, then people will not able to spend time to read your whole paper later on too. So this is the clue that people usually go through the abstract first. So readers should be able to assertion like what you are doing. You have to be very clear what you are going to tell them and what question you are trying to answer exactly. So what your research entails actually means you have to give a little bit background. What is exactly your research is about and what methods you are going to use or you have used already and stuff like that. And what you are doing it currently, right? Sometimes the research is ongoing research. You have just done the pilot, but you are still doing it. But you still want to submit your abstract to the conference. So you are just trying to use your pilot results to prepare an abstract. So you have to mention the significance and what conclusions can be made from your results and objective and hypothesis as well. So you have to tell that whether what you are going to check exactly. So what are the key elements of the abstract? Title is the backbone actually. Sometimes people just only see the title and they even don't go to the abstract. So from the title, they can able to decide whether they are going to accept or reject your abstract because there are a huge number of abstracts from the conference. For ISQA, we have more than 1,000 all the time abstracts. So you can imagine there are not so many reviewers available as well because this is a commitment as well. So what they have to do is they have to go through the keywords, right? Whenever somebody is applying and they have to use the keywords like mesh terms and stuff like that to attract the attention. So title and then introduction, you have to provide a brief background about your study as well, like 1 to 2 lines, why it is important. And then objective, hypothesis, question, problem, whatever you are going to see, you have to tell them what you are going to assess. Then material method, in which way you are going to do. For example, are you going to do case control study, cohort study, you have done meta-analysis, systematic review, whatever. So methodology, you have to use a keywords. Not just say we have done this, you have to be very clear that you have done cohort study, case control study, retrospective, prospective, what kind of database, stuff like that. So you have to use the keywords. And then results. The results are your major findings. You know, sometimes when we have done the study, we have a lot of study, results, but you have to come up with the key results. What are the important, significant, non-significant, and stuff like that. And then the conclusion. You have to draw on the conclusion. But always you have to keep in mind that this is an abstract. You cannot write too much details in the abstract. So what you have to do is you have to write only 1 to 2 sentences to make sure that this is within the words limit. So what is exactly title? So accurately describes what your study is about. You have to be very clear about the study. Include the key elements describing the content of the study, and commands attention from the attendees as well. Like, you know, your title is very, like, for example, is care safer? And question mark. Then people will be interested to see, you know, what is exactly inside the abstract. Is it safer, not safer, stuff like that, right? So this is a new trend nowadays. People use questions and stuff like that in the titles as well. But if you are doing a meta-analysis, case control study, you also have to mention in your title, it's better that people can understand from your title, so they can go through further. And then deciding factor on whether to read in the abstract or not is all depends on your title. And you have to target a presentation to the right scientific, session or audience and stuff like that. For example, if you are submitting your abstract to patient safety, then you have to use something related to patient safety. If you are using something related to technology and innovation, then you have to use the keywords in your title related to innovation and keyword. The reason is because then the reviewers, whoever they are going to see, they can see that your abstract title is matching with the section which you are going to submit, because there are so many sections around. So this is also very important. That's why there are the divisions in the SCORE conference as well, that there are different sections. Then tips, you have to be very specific. Use active voice, not passive. So you have to tell them exactly what you have done. Then there's an introduction part in the abstract, which is sometimes they use background, sometimes they say introduction. So it depends on the requirement from the different conferences as well. So you have to describe the general topic, why it is important. So at least you have to give them, one line. And always try to use some, the basic information from the authentic sources, like, whoever with the proper recognition. For example, like WHO has, so many references and stuff like that. The introductory sentence, you have to set like a stage. You have to tell them exactly why this is really important, because there are so many things going on. And you cannot come up with something very innovative and say that, oh, this is the first time we are doing. No, there are so many things have been done already, but you have to tell them why it is important, which you are doing. So this sentence is, like rational for the study. And then why did you did a study is not because it's never been done before, as already mentioned, because you never know. You cannot search all the database, so you cannot, justify this thing. And not because my mentor told me to do that as well, which is usually happen. And then there's objective hypothesis question problem. So your next sentence should clearly state your hypothesis, your study research question, what are your goals, objectives, and aims. And it should not be imperative. It should be like a proper hypothesis. Material and methods, I already mentioned, is very important as well, because if your method is not strong enough, then the reviewer will not get confidence of your results and study as well. So you have to tell them what method you have used already. There are different kind of methodologies. You have to be honest what kind of methodology you have used. It does not mean that the reviewers only prefer the RCTs or, the cohort studies. You have advantage in Taiwan using the cohort, retrospective studies using NHI database, which is very important because most of countries don't have this access and they don't know the value of this information as well. So follow with a sentence or two, briefly describe the approach, what you are going to do. And, you have to be pertinent information concerning the methods without providing further details. You don't have to be explain in detail your methodology, but you have to give them the keywords. You have used cohort study, how many samples, which year, which database, which country, stuff like that. Your results, so you have to tell them what kind of results you have found. So you don't have to put everything as already mentioned, and you have to describe only briefly, maybe 1 or 2 findings, the key findings of your study. And the amount of detail you provide, it depends on the different information. Sometimes, if you are doing, the meta-analysis, you have the numbers. But systematic review, you don't have any numbers, the statistic numbers. So you just have to type in a descriptive way. But in cohort, retrospective RCTs, you have some numbers as well. And this is always important that whenever you are submitting an abstract, you have to consult with your mentor or supervisor or whoever you are working with and supervising your work if you are not the independent one. Conclusion and significance is also very important because the reviewers, they also are interested to see what is exactly going to be the impact of your study, how it is important, what you have done. There are so many people who have done the work, but what will be the impact on the different audience? So what is the meaning of your findings? You have to explain them. If you found this much, 50% risk for patient safety on this particular area, then what is the impact going to be happen on other people, right? Are the people going to be die, or are there more adverse events going to be happen, which is not very much threatened, or maybe there's a cost which is going to be raised, something like that. So, and then you have to also highlight the major findings in the conclusion as well, and the take-home message as well, like what you are going to suggest. Maybe the things you are doing here in this research have some limitations which you want to address and say that, the other researchers should look into that if they have this information. So as I already mentioned, you have to be active, not passive. So whenever you are writing something, you have to actively address, not in a passive way. So there's active voice and passive voice in the research as well. So things to be aware of when you're writing an abstract. So the word limitation, which is very important because people, they have, when they're submitting to the conferences, there are different conferences that have different abstract limitation. So usually I think it's 200 and 250 words is a good way that you can submit to the different conferences. And it should stand alone, as I already mentioned, that you should tell the clear story, what you have done exactly, and your story may, change with time you present. So it doesn't matter, you have to stick to the one thing, because your results, when you start any project, there are some other findings. When you go further, then there are different findings, so you don't have to worry about this much. And the term significant can only be used if data were, statistically tested. So if you're not doing any statistics results, then you don't have to, because I have seen some people, they just do the review and they make a abstract and try to submit because they want to get into the conference and they don't have enough time to run the data and analysis and stuff like that. So that's why it's important. So references should not be included in the abstract, which people usually do the mistake. Because in the conferences, you don't have to refer inside, you can put at the end the separate list. And you need to avoid using the superfluous or, so many ambiguous words which says this is the first ever study, nobody has done this thing and blah, blah, blah. This is not a good thing. So you need to just tell clearly and keep it simple and stupid. Don't make it, extraordinary and stuff like that. Just make it brief, simple, that easy to understand as well for the readers as well. Not too complicated, because sometimes I saw people use the same word from the Google using the synonym words and put that words to make it more good English. Doesn't mean that everybody understand those kind of synonyms, because even in the normal English language they don't use these kind of specific synonyms as well. So have other people read your abstract. So you need to let other people to read your abstract to let them understand. If they understand, if they cannot understand, then it means that there are many other people who will not able to understand as well. So it's better you can share with your friends as well. Of course, you have to edit. You have to see there are some spelling errors, because sometimes when you're writing, it does not mean that you have done mistake intentionally. It could be automatically from the computer as well. So it's better you can recheck and proofread it again. So review process for the conferences, usually there are 2 to 3 expert reviewers from the system, and they can see from your, the main key theme, and then they can have an abstract and information, and they have to give the score based on that, and also some comments as well. So most of times they are like, 60% score if total accumulated based on the novelty, interest and all this kind of information. And then they can able to give you the time to read and then accept. I already mentioned the clarity and the communication should be very clear. The authorship. So title should be followed by the authors usually in the abstract, but in some conferences website there is a different section for the authors. You have to put the information. So just submit that separate abstracts. After the abstract, you also have to upload the file sometimes in the format of the conference, which they provide you to make a PPT or the poster format. You have to make sure that you meet the guidelines of the poster, what they are asking for, not just prepare whatever you have, because it is important that it should be able to visible for everyone in the system as well. Because whenever you upload the file, they have some specific requirements, and it's important. And you need to match the audience knowledge base and interest as well. So you focus on your message, that what you are going to convey, and what is the one thing you want to, people to remember. So you have to explain, because each poster have some unique findings. So you have to come up with some kind of innovative way, maybe use some pictures, some graphs and stuff like that, more visualization attraction. Sometimes people put so much text that it's hard to read and understand, and not many people are attractive to go to that poster. But if you put some visualization, some pictures, some graphs, people will be attracted automatically, and it's easy to understand for everyone. And so it should be like, at least 4 to 6 feet away you can able to read, and clearly organized. So again, I'm just trying to encourage here, the picture of Italy, the conference going to be held 30th August to 2nd September. So this time is not October. We usually have every year in October, the conference, ISCO conference. So this time we are making earlier is because of the weather and other kind of things. That's what I was meaning. So that was particular about the abstract, but I will go more further in detail now. Why and how to prepare your manuscript? Because once you have abstract, it's just from the main your study, right? But you also have to have your paper submitted to the different conferences, or maybe for the the journals, for example, like International Journal for Quality in Healthcare from ISCO. So there are different kind of scientific writings, right? For example, the people who are teaching in the universities or working in the hospital, they have to write some grant fundings. The grant fundings also have a kind of it's a scientific writing stuff. Then there are some review articles, because people who do their literature search, they have to write the review papers, which could be, just systematic review, narrative review, or meta-analysis. Then there are some short communications letter to editors as well. And then there are some full research papers as well. And then research papers also divided into different, like methodology paper, quality in practice, perspective paper. And then there are some patents, and there are, of course, theses as well. What is exactly the scientific paper? Which is written in a particular way. So there is a certain way to write a scientific paper. It must be written in a certain way. For example, and also it should be published in a certain way as well, because you cannot publish the scientific paper in any newspaper. Newspaper is having different layman structure. So, and you need to meet the test validation process as well, because you are going to publish, so they have to know about your data and all of the quality, and publish in a right place as well, because if you have done some study related to quality in healthcare, it should be published in a quality in healthcare journal, not in the public health journal. So that's also a problem, that for people, they cannot understand which kind of domain we should be publishing the paper. So why we usually have to write? Because we have something important to say, right? And also we want to advance professionally. If you publish something, it will be staying on internet and people will access, and if they are interested in that particular topic, they will be, contacting to the authors. Or also for faculties who are, professors, they have to write the grants, so that's why they have to show that they are capable of publishing papers in this particular field. And of course, to educate and to contribute to the institution and contribute to the field and improve practice, primary care role in translating basic science to clinical, and personal satisfaction and development as well. Because if somebody is publishing a lot of papers, getting a lot of citations, it's also a well-known researcher in the field too. So why we cannot usually write? Of course, we all are busy, right? This is a good, we usually always have the one excuse. Lack of time, unfamiliar with writing, unfamiliarity with the process, and sometimes bad experiences. Because if we feel like, oh, it will be rejected, and we submit and we got rejected, then we don't try again. Usually because honestly, being a editor, I can tell you that it does not mean that all the studies are bad. It's only that because there's a limitation of the studies. We cannot have all the papers coming into and we can publish in the journals. It's not like that. So you have to pick some of the papers from there. So you have to give a try. So you have to plan some strategies, and it's not really complicated. And of course, everyone got rejected. Jack Ma stories, right? Have you all heard, right? He applied to so many jobs and he got rejected. Now he has Alibaba. And he's the richest man in China too, right? So there are many other, like Bill Gates. He got a dropout from the school too, but he has done a lot. So questions to answer before you write. So whatever you are going to write, you have to be careful that the topic you are going to do is currently a hot topic. People are talking about that. For example, nowadays people are talking about artificial intelligence in medicine, in healthcare. So everybody's talking about that, right? How you can use AI. Actually, AI is not new. It was 50 years back too, right? But that time people did not care much, and they were saying, oh, this is a bad idea. But nowadays, from recent last 3 years, everybody's talking about AI in healthcare. So it means it's an important topic nowadays, right? If you have done something related to that, then people will be interested. And of course, so many journals. And then you also have to see, have you provided solutions to the difficult problems? It's not just you have used that, but means in which innovative way you are going to solve this problem. So you have to explain and think about that too. And also, because if you have done the research, are you able to publish now? Are you ready to publish? Or still the results are not enough as well? So if your all answers are yes, then you are ready to go further. So the scientific article must answer the basic, these few questions. For example, what is the problem that is addressed? What you are going to address exactly? So you have to pick the particular one specific problem. You cannot have a lot of problems. You have to focus on some specific problem. And then why it is important. So you have to tell. So it does not matter that the problem is important to one particular community. But you have to know that this is really an important problem, because you cannot find all the people's problem in one solution for that, right? So everybody has their different solutions as well. So you have to focus on particular problem and particular solutions for that. And also your results. What are your results? And what are the implications of your results? If you have done already research, and how you can utilize this research. And then what do you recommend as further study for others as well? I already mentioned that sometimes we have limitations, so we cannot do everything, so we suggest other people to do. For example, if you have done some study using observational health data, like NHI data, like it's a dry data, right? Observational data. But now you found that there are some cancer risks using some drugs, blah, 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 using observational data. And maybe some people will claim that, how you can do that only based on the observation. You have to provide some clinical evidence or animal models. So then you will suggest people that, okay, you can do the translational medicine study and do some animal modeling study and see that whether these results are consistent with them. I mean, in future, something like that. Of course, you don't have to do everything, but you can recommend to the other researchers. So basically, all kind of papers, research findings and other kind of stuff, scientific writing, they have basically 4 things in common, no matter what kind of paper it is. First is introduction. So introduction means what is this exactly? So you have to set, a ground, like start telling a story, like, what is this exactly? And then matters, like which way you have done this one, right? Which methodology you have used. And then the results. What did you find exactly? These are called results, the outcomes which you have found. And then you have to discuss this in detail by comparing with the other literature which has been done, that what does that exactly means. So how these studies you are going to, the results you are going to interpret. So actually it's like you are telling a story, like you have to have a beginning, which is introduction, and then you have a middle body, and then you have to end at the conclusion as well. So it should be easy to read and understand. The writing style is very important for scientific writing, for the paper. So articles should be understood easily by readers. As already mentioned, that don't use very extraordinary vocabulary words, because not everybody is aware of that. You don't know if your reviewer is from which country, is from America, from Europe, because in most of Europe, even they don't have the English as a first language, so they don't know even vocabulary, right? If your paper is going to be reviewed in Spain, imagine, so it will be totally different. For them this is the second language. So this is not the important thing here first. It just be easy to understand, but you can refine with time too. So use always the plain language, simple language, and avoid the jargons in teacher, and be precise. And active, not passive. I already mentioned this thing before too. And use the short words, not very long sentences, long paragraphs you are finishing, and you are also getting complicated by yourself and also to the next people too. Just use the short sentences. And always be plural, not single, like, I have done this. No. You have to mention like, we have done this. Because you have to show them as a team member. You cannot do everything by yourself, right? So you have to be more polite. And gender should be neutral, not just focusing on women, men, and stuff like that. You have to be neutral, right? So that other people cannot understand and distinguish between. And always focus on the international readers. Don't specify. Of course, you can specify that this study has been done in Taiwan, but the results implications can be, implemented in anywhere in the world as well, right? Based on the scenarios. So you don't have to just limit yourself to the one particular audience. And explain the abbreviations if you're using the abbreviations. You don't have to, just using the abbreviations, because I can understand there are abbreviations where you cannot write again and again, otherwise there are less number of words you will have. But once you have used the abbreviation once, then you have to mention clearly at that time. And then later you can use the abbreviations. And you have to remove these as much as from the manuscript. For one clear paper, you need to know that these are the 3 C's you have to follow. Clarity, conciseness, and correctness, the accuracy. So you can go through your paper again and again. The key is to be brief, specific, without, taking out so many important information. So make it simple, brief, and informative. So you need to know your enemy. What is exactly the problem for reviewers and editors and stuff like that? What is the main problem? The problem is repetition. You are saying the same thing in the introduction, same thing in the method, same thing in the results, and same thing in the conclusion and discussion. This is actually, making a loss of, your interest to read the study. And also, you are not consistent. You are talking something one here, A, and then you jump to the Z, and then you came to the B again. No, you have to be consistent. You have to set a story, like what has been done, step by step. And don't be ambiguous about that too. If you are not sure about something, don't mention about that. Okay, don't overstate some things which you are not sure. And don't exaggerate. Means you don't have to say this is the first study ever and stuff like that. I already mentioned you have to be humble and say that, as per our knowledge, this is the study which we have done in Taiwan, stuff like that. But don't overstate that too. So these are the common things which usually annoy the editors and reviewers as well. So paper actually comprised on these components. Title, authors, abstracts, keywords, introduction, method, results, discussion, acknowledgement, references, and supplementary material here. Title should be very clear, describe the content, ensure your recognition that, for the writers, and abstract should be usually 150 to 250 words, but different journals have different requirements as well. I always encourage people to make it brief, like 150 to 200 words. The reason is because if you got rejected from one journal, you don't have to waste time to make it short for the next journal submission as well. So you already have the one crispy abstract in the first time, so you can submit to different kind of journals. Keywords, always try to use keywords which are important and use the mesh terms. Do you know what are mesh terms? From PubMed, you search the papers, and on the corner you can see the mesh terms. Those are the terms which are defined from the medical library, so you can see. For example, if you are doing research on cancer, you can see what are the mesh terms for cancer, like oncology and some other carcinogenesis and stuff like that. So it will help to index your paper in the database. So whoever is trying to search paper with the cancer, your paper will pop up in that search too. So introduction, you have to explain the problem, and methodology, like you have to tell that how you have collected your data. Results, you have to tell what you have discovered. Discussion, you have to, discuss about the findings and, the implications of the study. And acknowledgement. For example, like sometimes we have some study which got the grant to do this project, so we have to acknowledge them. Or some people who helped you in refining the paper, writing the paper, or doing the statistics which you don't want to put as a co-author, you think that you can acknowledge them. Or sometimes you get just some feedback and guidance from those people. References. You have to ensure that the paper you are referring should be properly referred here, because sometimes there's unpublished paper, you cannot refer those papers because you have to find the authentic source from the internet. So it is always important that you should have a proper source. And then appendices, some journals provide supplementary material if you think, because you cannot put everything in the paper, because paper is also have limitation of 3,000 words, maybe 2,500 words. And sometimes you have more table or figures to explain your research, because of course the reviewer is also just a reviewer, so they are not like angels, so they can understand what is exactly. So sometimes you have to provide extra material which you can submit as a supplementary material. So here again I will focus on what is exactly the title. Already mentioned, it's the backbone of the study. Any article, somebody read the article, they can able to decide whether they should go through your abstract or not. So a good title should contain fewest possible words, not very long titles, not 3 or 4 sentences, just one crispy sentence is important, and adequately describe the paper. So what you should do, convey main findings of the research, be specific, be concise, complete, and attract the readers. What you shouldn't do, unnecessary jargons. Don't use the abbreviations in the titles. People use that too, and we don't understand what is ABN or something. And then, some unnecessary detail, like you have done this study, blah, 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 and, it's like so much details in the title. So this is not important at that time. And focus on the part of the content only, what you have exactly. So this is an example. You can see here there's a title. This title is like a one full paragraph of introduction. So you can see here there's another title which is a little bit more brief, so people can understand most of the information from here, right? Abstract. A good quality abstract, really strongly influence on the editors and reviewers as well. Because they feel like, whenever you search a paper, always the title and abstract appears, right? Because not all the papers are open access. So you cannot access the full paper. So you only can able to see the title and abstract. So a good abstract should be precise and honest. You have to tell everything very clear. Should be crispy, concise, and accurate, and it can stand alone. Uses no technical jargons. Brief and specific. Don't cite any references in the abstract. And also, you have to keep in your mind that whenever you're writing an abstract, you're actually trying to sell your study. So you are marketing your study. You are trying to convince the editor that this is really important study, so you want to publish, something like that. So structured abstracts, there are sometimes they call structured abstracts, sometimes there's unstructured abstracts. What is structured abstracts? Structure means you have to divide each section, the line, into different. For example, you should have purpose, design, finding, research limitations, and, the discussion or conclusion, stuff like that. But even they don't ask you to divide into headings, but your abstract still should be, prepared according to these things without removing the headings. So for example, your abstract is 250 words, or, sometimes, so each section you can focus on only 100 words. So you cannot limit too much extraordinary above or below. So purpose is your main reason, your aim of the study, design, what method you have done. I already mentioned, there are different kind of methodology you need to explain clearly. Scope of the study, findings, your results and discussion, you have to tell what you have found, and then you can tell a little bit, what these findings have implications. And then there are some research limitations, of course, because there is no research which is 100%, in the real setting. So you have to have some limitations always as well. So if you think this is very important limitation, you can mention here. There are some practical implications as well. Like, for example, if there is policies, if you have done some studies on policy, so you can mention about that, this is the implication that this policy should be implemented to, to stop this kind of harm and stuff like that. And originality and value, so who would benefit from this study as well? For example, some studies are only focusing on pediatricians, right? That particular specific. Some are only for the healthcare managers, right? Some are only for the patients, for patient education. But there are some studies which are general as well. So you have to be specific, and you have to know what is your study about. Keywords I already mentioned, it is very important for your study as well, because you have to use the mesh terms is important. And the journals usually ask for 5 to 10 keywords automatically. And sometimes they will give you some options as well to select online as well. So you have to be very specific and avoid uncommon abbreviations in the keywords as well. Because in the keywords abbreviation, there are so many kind of abbreviations people won't understand. So try to use the full terminologies. And mesh term is the best way to use in scientific writing. So introduction, you have to provide the necessary background. Now people usually ask, like, they are writing introduction and they have already 100+ references, how they can limit their introduction to the short introduction. So what you have to do, are you going to cite and write 5 pages only for introduction for your paper? Because research paper is only comprised on 3,000 words. How you can write 5 pages only for introduction? And you cannot cite all the 100 references in the introduction, right? Because there are journals, they have some limitation for the references as well. Like, you cannot submit more than 25 references. So what you have to do is, you have to define clearly your aim, and screen out the studies to make it more relevant studies, more recent studies, which has been published more closely related to your work, and then try to narrow down. So your introduction should be very clear, and you have to, why the current work was performed. So you have to link with the previous work, and you have to define the aim and significance and what has been done before and what was done in your research. You have to tell in a brief terms. Not everything you have to explain in the introduction, because introduction is only to explain the problem, the background, and then what was achieved in a brief term, like what you have done now. So just in 1 or 2 lines. So there is a square guidelines from DMJ, which usually say for introduction means why did you start this study. So for this one, you have to set up stage, like, you have to tell the problem description. What is problem description? Like nature and significance of the local problem. And then available knowledge. What is already available in the market, means online internet. When you're accessing PubMed, how many people have done this research? Maybe some people have done one research in US last year, and you are going to do the same thing in Taiwan. It doesn't matter. It's okay, because they have done in the US, but you are going to do in Taiwan. So you want to see what is the difference. So there's no harm. But you have to search the information. So you cannot ignore the paper who have published recently and you are trying to pretend that there is nothing has been done, because you cannot ignore that. And rational. So you have to know informal and formal frameworks, models, concepts or theories which has been used, or some reasons, assumptions, and interventions, because there are different kind of interventions as well, right? So you have to know. And also, of course, specific aims. Why you have to do this study? Why you plan to do this one? This is also very important. So for introduction, you have to consult the guide for authors for word limit. For each journal, they have different guidelines, right? I already mentioned. So for example, if somebody is, some journal is asking for 3,000 words, it's different. For some journals, they are asking 4,500 words, then it's okay that you can write a little bit longer introduction as well. So it varies journal to journal as well. So you have to set the scene and you have to outline the problem and the hypothesis and ensure that the literature cited is balanced. I already mentioned sometimes you have thesis with 100+ references and you want to make it into paper, which is hard sometimes. But you have to screen out the important references out and most relevant, because in thesis you have to explain everything in detail to let people know what you have done in all couple of years. And it should be up to date and relevant. And also define any non-standard abbreviations. If you are using any abbreviations, just explain them. So what you shouldn't do in introduction, don't write extensive introduction, means not too much details like from 1950 or 1850. This is useless for now because people are more interested in the recent ones. And also don't cite disappropriate material. Like, people sometimes, oh, the other lab is doing this thing and just from the news they just pick it to that. No, you have to have a scientific evidence. So you just go through the PubMed and other scientific database to search and cite properly. And also describe the method results and, conclusions. This is introduction. They are not asking for methods, introduction, or the discussion or conclusions. They're just asking what is exactly the problem and what you are going to do for this one. So this one, the other results, methods, and conclusion, you have to keep for their own sections. And also, don't overuse the terms like novel or for the first time, because I already mentioned you never know. There are so many databases around the world and you don't have time to go through and screen all the database as well. So maybe someone has done some study in other language, like Spanish language. You cannot read, so you don't know, right? So things are like this. And one important thing is don't try to facilitate your friends so much that you are citing their papers unnecessarily. This is also a very common practice. Sometimes people just, they recommend, okay, I will get citation, so please cite my paper in the introduction. If it is relevant, it's okay. It's highly relevant because sometimes you are working in a group, so most people are working together and they are doing on a similar stuff. But if the people are not working in a similar way and the research is not important and it's not relevant, then you cannot. So then comes to the method section. Method is actually the sequence, depend on the study design first. You have to tell what is exactly you have done, which method you have used. Patient description and intervention is very important. You have to tell which kind of patient, what age group, which particular gender, and all these kind of things you have to tell in detail in the method section. And also you have to define the endpoints, primary endpoint or secondary endpoint. It depends on what kind of interventions you are doing and stuff like that. And then you have to explain in detail what kind of statistics methods you have used in your study. It has to be very clear, like you are using t-tests, ANOVA, or other kind of stuff, multivariate and stuff. For ethics, you also have to tell them the informed consent, IRB approval as well. For review studies, some studies you don't need IRB approval, but for some kind of database studies or some clinical trials, you need to have IRB approval. And some studies there is an exemption from IRB, but you have to provide to tell them that this is exempted from IRB. For example, like we use anonymous data, de-identified data from NHI, right? So we have exemption, but we still have to have to get the exemption. Your method should be reproducible. Reproducible means if somebody wants to do the same study in other country, like in Denmark, they can able to do that study using your methodology. So you cannot just, manipulate or hide up and down. So you have to be very clear and concise. So results section. The main findings of the research, what you have to do is description of the participant, sample, excluded, lost to follow-up, etc. So you have to explain exactly, for example, when you are following up the patients, some patients maybe die, or some patients just move. So you have to explain every numbers, primary outcome, secondary efficiency endpoints, and other kind of stuff. Use more figures and tables in the results section instead of writing so much descriptive material. Means don't write too much. Try to show more table and figures. It will save you a number of words and also easy to understand for other readers. This is practice as well from the international journals. And you show the statistical numbers, the analysis. And compare with the like and like means if you are comparing some groups, so you have to compare the similar groups. And try to use some pictorial diagrams for people to understand better way instead of just describing. What you shouldn't do is don't interpret or comment on the findings. Means just write the results, but don't tell what this result means exactly or what these results have implications on the population. You don't have to write that because that is for the later part discussion. And don't duplicate the same data, like if you are writing in description and also showing the same data in the tables, or sometimes you are showing the same data in tables and also showing the same data in figures. You don't have to do that. If you're showing in table, don't show in the figures. And some kind of graphic illustrate data, which, easily summarize in text, you don't have to use that too. So from Square, it is called methods is like, what did you do exactly? It should be actually the slide previous, sorry. So for method is context. You have to set the context first. The elements considered important at the outset of introducing the interventions. You have to tell what kind of interventions. So description of interventions are very important. For example, if you're talking about exposure, exposure has different definitions, right? For example, sometimes people are exposing to drug. Sometimes people are exposing to the air, right? So exposure definition is very important. So in the methodology section, you should be clear about your assumptions because you are assuming some of the definitions. And you also have to specify the team involved in your work, right? And also the study of the intervention, like approach you are choosing for the intervention as well, like which way, exposure. Are you checking the exposure from the database? Are you asking people for the exposure? Because if you're asking people by questionnaire, then there could be different kind of biases, right? Because if you're asking someone like how many cigarettes do you smoke a day? There are different people, they will give you different answers. Not maybe sometimes they don't want to show exact numbers. So same thing here. But if you are prescribing medicine in the database, you can exactly find how much medicine you prescribe for 1 month, 2 months, which dose and stuff like that. So there are different things you have to consider. Then measures, like in which way you are measuring this one, outcomes, right? So you have to choose the process and outcomes, interventions, rationale for choosing them. Like you have to define why you selected this method over the other method, because there are sometimes different methods, right? But why you selected this one? Maybe because of your population, right? You think that this population has more convenience with using this one to collect the sample. For example, if you are asking people, for elderly people, you are not going home to home. You are just asking by call some questions, right? To follow up some interventions. But sometimes for the adults, you don't need to call them. Maybe you can just send them email or, from app, you can get the information back. So there are different methods. So you need to know the limitations of different methods as well. Like what is the response rate and stuff like, because if you are calling someone, of course, definitely they're going to pick the call. But if you are letting them to report you automatically, then the difference will be different. The reason is because the response rate, the people voluntarily they have to do is depend on their interest to your study as well. So there are different limitations for that too. And analysis. So what kind of analysis you are going to do? Qualitative, quantitative, which methods you are going to use. You have to be very clear in this entire things. And ethical considerations. I already mentioned that, you have to get the IRBs. You have to consider what kind of ethical approval you need. Sometimes you don't need any IRB. Sometimes you need exemption of IRB. Sometimes you have to go through different IRB structures as well. So this is also very important. You have to address. So for results, the Square, they mentioned that what did you exactly find? It shows the results, right, from your study. So for results, you have to have initial steps of intervention. What kind of intervention you have done? And then evolution over time. For example, like timeline diagram. For if you are tracking one patient from 1990 and seeing that if their patient is taking particular drug like statins over 10 years, what will be the cancer risk? Stuff like that. So you have to draw the proper flow charts or tables, including the modifications you have made during your, interventions. And detail of the process, outcomes, how did you measure the outcomes is very important as well. And you have to have the elements that interacted with the intervention. For example, like sometimes you have some confounding factors, right? So you have to consider what kind of other factors could be there. And also the observations associated with outcome, intervention, or other kind of relevant elements. Unintended consequences. Sometimes we plan the study, but it does not mean that the study is exactly going to be same after 5 years as well. Sometimes you have to do the changes with time, right? So maybe you have to change your sample size, you have to change your dropouts, you have to do some other kind of modification, maybe you have to add additional outcome measure, stuff like that. Or maybe cost is associated with that too, right? So there are different things. So it does not mean what you have decided 5 years back will be the same after 5 years too. And sometimes when you run the data, you also try to change some variables as well because you want to adjust for certain things. So it also depends. And of course, you have to care about the missing data as well. Sometimes the information is missing, so how you are going to tackle with that and how you are going to address that in your study as well. So discussion, what you have to describe. How the results relate to the study's aim and hypothesis, how the findings relate to those of the other studies, and theoretical implications and possible practical applications. All possible interpretation of your findings. Whatever you have found, the important things you have to interpret and tell and compare with other literature. And of course, don't forget to mention in discussion section the limitation of your studies. For example, like if there are different limitations, you don't have some kind of particular sample or stuff like that, so you have to mention that too. And future research directions is also very important. You have to tell that, what you are suggesting for other people. I already gave one example before, that if you are doing observational health study and you want to assess your results, compare with the, animal model or clinical or cell culture and stuff like that, so you can ask the other people to collaborate with you, or they can do independently as well. So what you have to avoid? The grand statements. I already mentioned, don't have to make it like, this is a novel treatment which massively reduced the prevalence of malaria from the third world. Because we don't know what will happen, right? Every day there are new technologies coming, new things are changing, so you cannot overestimate. Introducing new results or terms. You don't have to introduce in the discussion. What you have found, just be consistent to that. Or conclusion. So in conclusion, you have to put your study in context and identify the key findings and application, describe how it represents and advance in the field, and suggest future experiments as well. What you have to avoid is repetition again. The things you have already told, you don't have to explain again. And don't over speculate. And don't overemphasize the impact of. So from Square, which they mentioned that discussion means, what does it exactly means? The study, the overall study. So you have to interpret, like discuss, compare with other literature, and show what you have found. So first of all, you have to summarize the key findings in a way that you have to explain the relevance. What you were trying to intend, did you find the same thing? Specific aims, particular strengths of the project, and then interpretation, like nature of the association between intervention and the outcomes, comparison of results with findings, with other publications. For example, if some researcher, there was a very interesting example I didn't put here because of the time. There is one paper published in JAMA about the same topic, and after 1 month there is another paper published in BMJ on the same topic, but they both have different findings totally. One are saying that this is, positively associated, and the other journal was saying it's negatively associated. And both are very prestigious journals. So you can imagine how the inconsistent things could be happening. So reasons for any differences between observed and anticipated outcomes, like what you were expecting, but you got the different findings. So you have to explain that too. And also, influence of the context, like how it is going to be influenced, and cost or any other kind of things. And limitations. So you have to generalize your study, right? Because you cannot only assume everything is similar like in Taiwan, in other countries as well. Their settings are different. If you compare Taiwan with some African settings, it's totally different. They don't have any, well structured or any data stuff like that too. But so you have to generalize in a way that you have to mention the limitation study. So every country has different strengths and limitations. So when you are doing a project here, you have to see the strengths and limitations of this country compared to the other countries. Factors that might have limited internal validity, such as confounding bias, imprecision of the design, method, Meyer analysis. And efforts made to minimize and adjust the limitations as well. Like, if you knew that this is the limitation of your study, what you have done to minimize this? Sometimes you adjust for confounding factors. So these are the things you also have to explain clearly. For conclusion, the usefulness of the work, you have to write sustainability, potential for spread to other contexts, and implication of practice and further study in the field, and suggested the next steps. Already mentioned that too. And from Square guidelines is also suggested. And then after discussion, we usually have acknowledgement section. So what is exactly acknowledgement? Whoever helped you and you think that you cannot add them as a co-author, so you can put them in acknowledgement. So there are some people who helped you in writing, editing the language, maybe give you some potential comments, some technical help, or sometimes, some grant fundings, and acknowledge from the, other sources as well. So then comes to the references. References, you have to check for the current literature. And you have to really care about the consistency of the references. It should be really relevant to your literature. And the reference citation must be accurate and complete as well. You cannot just cite the title. You also have to have the volume number, page number, and all this kind of stuff. So each journal have different requirements. They will tell you what to do, what to follow exactly. And I usually recommend EndNote people to use because it's easy to change, or if you're removing any references, it will automatically help to update, and it will also automatically help to import the correct reference. What you should avoid is personal communication. If somebody's telling you that they are developing some kind of project, but you don't have any evidence, you just hear about that, so you cannot cite that. And also the published material, which is in a local language, because local language people cannot understand, so it's hard for them to read. So you don't have to cite unless there is an English translation available for you. And excessive self-citation, because sometimes if you are a researcher yourself as well, and you have done a lot of studies related to the projects because it's your main work, but you don't have to do the excessive citation. Means if you're citing 10 references and all 10 is yours, or all 8 are yours. So this is also not a good practice. But you can cite, say that, you have done some study before, 1 or 2, related to your project. Then there's a supplementary material. Supplementary material is information related to and supportive of the main text, like secondary importance. Means you want to tell reviewer and editor or anyone who was interested more in detail to, to look at the literature. Available online when the manuscript is published. So because they will not include in the main paper, they will be available as an online source, so you can check that. Tables and figures. So you have to present the list of numbers, text in columns, and figures visually represent the results or illustrations, concepts, images, but you always have to provide the caption for that. Because if you are having the table and you don't have the table title, nobody understands what is this table about, what is this figure about. So there is a caption. Caption is the main title of the figure. You have to tell this is the demographic characteristics, or this is the ANOVA analysis for this comparison, stuff like that. For figure and table, there is also very standard guidelines. You have to have a high resolution figures, neat and legible labels, simple, clearly formatted, and indicate the errors if there are any errors. And detail the caption. You have to have the detailed caption so people can understand what is figure and table about. So there is an ethics, of course, involved in scientific writing as well, because sometimes when you're working in a group, there are so many things involved in that. So what you have to do is be factual, be honorable, legal, truthful, objective, and accurate. What you shouldn't do is don't deceive and falsify the results. If you think this is not significant and you're changing a variable to make it statistically significant, it's not a good practice. So you have to be careful about that too. And don't fabricate the data as well, and don't plagiarize as well. And of course, there are some authorship issues as well, which you also need to tackle by yourself, of course. Then there are some informed consents as well. Nowadays, people, the journals usually send email to all the authors because there are many incidents happen around the world where people say that, you know, they were not aware that they are the co-author of the study, but because they didn't get any notification. But actually they knew, so, you know, it's kind of complicated. What you have to do is, nowadays you have to share with all the people you are involving them as a co-author, and also journal also usually send the email to all the authors as well, because you have to key in the information of all the authors. And if you are doing clinical trials, you have to register online and acknowledge the grants funding and avoid the, you know, any duplicate publication. For example, if you have already published somewhere, then you shouldn't do again. So what is plagiarism exactly? So it's a practice of actually taking someone else's work or ideas, or, you know, pasting your own labels, stuff like that. So it could have some serious effects. So you just need to know and aware of that. So conflict of interest is very important, and of course is common in everywhere. It's not just particular to somewhere. So how should we manage it? We should ignore either if we cannot accept it. Avoidance, hard, or, you know, if you want to disclose to editor or author and reader, it's up to you. Because sometimes you have competitors, and if you are submitting a paper, and, you know, your other team members, they are competitors, so if they become a reviewer of your study, then they may not be happy to review and they will reject it, right? So usually it's asked in the journal platform that which reviewers you are suggesting and which reviewers you want to oppose. Because it's common practice that sometimes you have competitors and you're not happy with and stuff like that. So same thing for the authorships as well. If you have some issues within a group, so you have to tackle them well. Then how to find a suitable journal for your manuscript after you've done this one. Impact factor is a common practice. We call it a good standard for a journal, because if the journal have a good impact factor, we feel like, oh, this journal is very good. So you need to know, first of all, what is the audience of the journal, which domain your study is, what is the impact factor, what is the average publication time, because some journals will take forever to publish the paper. If you submit today, they will take 6 months, 1 year just to send you the one. I have a good similar experience. I submitted one paper and it took me 1 year just to give me one response, one reviewer, first reviewer, and after sending so many emails. And there are some journals you submit today and they will send you, you know, decision in 3 days or tell you what your paper status is. So, and also the open access or not open access, because you also have to be careful about the open access journals. Some open access journals nowadays are business. So you have to be careful to choosing the good ones, which you think, you know. But open access is a good thing actually, because everybody can have access to the information. But you have to be careful choosing the good journals. This is what the main thing is. And decide on the journal. One thing you have to be careful about is don't submit to multiple journals at the same time. If you are submitting to one journal, just wait for their decision. So if you are going to submit to the multiple journals at the same time and thinking that, you know, maybe one journal will be able to review and publish stuff like that, it's not a good practice and it will have a serious consequences. So why people try to use this impact factor, you know, journals is because they think that they have a greater visibility of research findings, because most of the people, they will go through or read those journals. increased chances of more citations, and greater recognition among peers, and associated benefits such as promotion, of course, because if you publish in JAMA, everybody will know, right? So what do journal editor and reviewers want? They want your paper is significantly novel, and the manuscript is broad interest for people, for international audience, not for the local one. So it's usually like a balance, novelty and aim and scope impact factor. So what journals actually want and what doesn't want? So journals look for quality, significant advance in the field, show as well-designed study and readability, and studies that meet the standards, the ethical standards. And what they don't want is the duplications. If some studies publish in other and you are trying to do the same thing again, or maybe just no scientific interest or out-of-date work, because if you have done something in 2010, now if you are trying to submit in the journals, they will be hesitate to take those work because they are interested in the recent work. And also insufficient data, or also sometimes authors do mistake that they don't follow the journal guidelines. If you don't follow the journal guidelines, your paper will be immediately fast rejected, even not going to the editor as well. So it means like you are wasting the time too. At least you have to show some interest and respect to the journal which you are submitting, to follow the guidelines and see, Of course, when you get accepted, what led you to get accepted? First of all, you have to pay attention to the details, check and double check your work, consider the reviews, and your language, of course, should be plain and simple. A readable presentation is important. Take your time for revision and acknowledge those who help you, and new, original, and previously unpublished data should be there. Critically evaluate your own paper, and ethical rules must be obeyed as well, and then it leads you to acceptance. And what things to check before submission? You have to check whether it's new and original research, and all the authors which are listed, their names are correct, because this is also a big problem. Whenever we are listing the author's name, we have spellings mistake. When the paper is accepted and published, we didn't care that time, but once it's online available, then we came to know, our name spelling is mistake, or affiliation is not correct. And then nobody will recognize you, because on the internet, they will only follow your correct names from the department, stuff like that. So you have to be very careful. And once it's published, then it's hard to change. They cannot change your paper. So what you have to do is you have to submit erratum, and erratum is like another kind of publication, which is not actually a good practice to, to publish so many erratums as well. So if you're using other figures and tables, you have to obtain a copyright to reproduce, or proper affiliation and acknowledgements as well. Quick checklist before your submission. You have to check the journal, which section you are going to submit, and whether you are adhering the journal guidelines, and your manuscript is typed with generous margins, and correct number of copies you have supplied. Is your recent version drafted, or you are picking the wrong file? So when you are selecting the files, you have to be careful and save the correct names. And your figures, your numbers, your tables, and everything should be clearly formatted. And of course, the number of words for the paper is very important, because sometimes we get a lot of emails from authors asking, oh, you have a limit of 3,500 words, but we have 4,500 words. Can you allow us? In some journals, we cannot allow at all. The reason is because if your paper is too long and unnecessary information is there, some journals have page budget limitation. And the page budget limitation means they publish print version as well, and they cost a lot. So some publishers are very expensive too. So you have to be careful about that too. Author contribution, who did what? You have to also define clearly before submitting that who did the conception, design, analysis, interpretation of the data, drafting the article, or revising critically important, or final approval of the draft for publication as well. Because sometimes if you have a group of people, you have to define what people contributed to what things. Okay, because sometimes you have statisticians, sometimes you have clinicians, sometimes you have other healthcare providers. Cover letter is also one of the important things when you're submitting a paper. Reason is because the cover letter is read by editor first time. So it will provide an impression to the editor, what is your study. And we have practiced like this kind of cover letters, just 2 lines. It doesn't make any sense. We don't know what is exactly. So it's not a good practice. I removed the other cover letter actually because it has some information, but the important thing is that you have to address to the editor personally. Like you have to tell to the particular journal, like, what is the editor's name, journal, quality in healthcare, stuff like that, and submit your manuscript title and publication type, and give a brief rational, like, description about your study, like what is your study about, like, kind of background, and then what you have found, and how it is going to be important for the international audience and that particular journal, and then explain the importance of the findings and provide the corresponding author details complete. So a good cover letter should have editor's name, addressed to the journal editor. First sentence, provide title, author's list, and journal name. Give the background of the research, what was done and what was found, the significance of your research, interest to the journal readers, confirm the originality of the submission, confirm that there is no competing financial interest as well, and correspondence address as well. So you can see that this cover letter can provide everything detail about your study. But if you have a clinical trial study, you can also add the clinical trial registered number here too, so people can understand from the cover letter that you already registered the study too. When you are recommending reviewers for your study, because some journal asks to recommend reviewers, it's because it's hard to secure the reviewers. It's a volunteer work for most of the journals, and not everybody have enough time to review. Sometimes they agree and they cannot complete the review. So you have to be honest who are capable in your field, no matter from which country, but avoid from the same institution and same country. So if you have done some work in Taiwan, don't recommend the people from Taiwan. Try to find some other collaborators or other people in your field too. Because even you recommend the reviewers, the ultimate decision is from the editors, and editor will know who is what, They can find the relationship, because on the internet you can find everything. The database are linked to each other, so you can know. Because the people you are recommending ultimately have done something with you before too. So how journal usually process your paper? It's not a black hole, so you can see here when you submit the paper, then there are the basic requirements for the editor, and then they can see if your paper met the guidelines. The editorial assistant will see, or then they will send back to the author immediately for the further, to follow the guidelines of the journal. Or if it met the guidelines, then they will assign to editor, and editor will decide whether to fast reject or send to the reviewers. If they decide to send to the reviewers, then it will go to the reviewers, and reviewer will review and then it back to the editor again. And then editor will see the reviewer comments, and then also check into the study and see that whether this study has potential to send back for revision or just rejected, because maybe this requires extensive revision, or even you revise, you cannot improve that study. So if the study you cannot improve further with the revision only, they will just reject it. But if you can able to revise, and editor think that this is enough, so they will give you an opportunity to revise. They will send the major or minor revision, depend on the other. And again, it will go to the same reviewers again, and then the same process will happen again, and ultimately you will get acceptance if the paper is okay. But what most of people usually do the mistake is when they get the revision, they don't really pay attention to revise paper according to the comments as well. So where they get the trouble. So reviewers usually are the most, the people who are most important, because they will go through your study in depth. No other people went through, because they will read your paper. They are the one who are assessing your study in depth. Because once your paper is published, people will read in general. But once before publication, they will review and they will provide some feedback and comments. So you have to be very careful. So what are the constraints from the reviewers? We usually is like, it's a slow process, because I told you it's a voluntary process. Sometimes some reviewers, because if you invite two different reviewers, maybe both have different conflictive, comments as well, because they are just independent reviewers. And also, sometimes there is a data manipulation and invention as well. So if you get a request for revision, it's a good news. So what you have to do is don't panic. Take your time and revise it step by step with each comments properly. So you prepare another file, response to reviewer comments, paste all the comments and response one by one comment properly. And also on your main paper, you use the track changes. What most of people, the authors, they do mistake is they don't use the track changes in their revised paper. And if you don't use the track changes, the reviewer will not able to know where you have done the changes. And this is not a good practice as well. So what we have to do is you have to revise using track changes and also make another paper using the review to response. So the comments are not usually personal. So you have to understand that this is about the research project. They want you to improve your study. So how to revise your case? So acknowledge the editor and set the revision deadline, because there is always deadline for the journals. If you agree, sometimes you are not agree with the editor, with the reviewers' comments, right? Because there are two reviewers, they both have conflictive comments, and you think that, if you have to follow this experiment, you have to do everything from the scratch. So you can accept those comments, but you can tell reviewer, try to explain them that, you cannot revise this in that way because your main focus is on that particular thing. Maybe in your future study, you can able to do that something. So it does not mean that you have to follow 110% the same things. The things which you can able to do that, you can tell them, and with the things which you have limitation, you can explain clearly, just to be honest with the reviewers as well. And meet the deadline, and attach a covering letter which identifies point by point the response to the reviewer comments as well. So what if your paper is rejected? You don't have to give up, just try again. And the comments are good for you because you can improve and submit to other. As already mentioned that not all the studies are bad. It's just because every journal has their own, limitation for publication as well. So there are always positive outcome for rejection, incentive to improve your work, valuable feedback, and good experience. So if you got accepted, then what do you have to do? Give party to your friends? But before, you have to proofread your paper. So here is a chance. If you have any mistake in the authors or affiliation of your co-authors, you have to go through the paper and you can change in proofread, because proofread version is not still online. So they give authors a chance to revise to see if there's any mistake for first name, last name, affiliation, and other kind of stuff, acknowledgement, stuff like that. So you have a chance, so you should take your time and revise. Usually the proofread is for 24 hours. It's not, they don't give much time. So you have to be careful about that. And once it's accepted and already you submit the proofread, then you should work on the promoting your paper, your research paper. So what you should do, why it is important, first of all, because you want to support, to educate people, right? You have to tell them what you have done. Otherwise, people will not able to know. And also, you have to raise your profile as well, right? Because people will read your paper. You have more, rares, and then maybe some people would like to cite your paper too. And maybe some people, they don't have those particular skills, and they would like to collaborate with you. And they say, oh, I have these skills, you have these skills, maybe work together. And maybe attract the new opportunities as well. And how? You can use the social media, which is free nowadays. Everybody, most of journals are also using the social media now. You can see there are some circles with the tweets and colors. And use your network, some Listrave and other kind of lists. Contact to the authors in your referral list. And or you can use some, media or your organization, hospital, or universities thing. Or maybe ask publishers to provide you the leaflets. Because sometimes the publisher leaflets also have the listed number of papers published from the particular issue, and your paper may be one mentioned there too, with your name too. So it will be good. And these are some examples we have from ISQA. You can see here we have tweet from ISQA, and the paper is published in the International Journal on Quality in Healthcare. And then you can see here another one from OUP, and you can see here we use some terms and this kind of things. So it's very good because people, you can see here, retweeted and liked and stuff like that. So I hope that you all are encouraged to submit a lot of abstracts to ISQA conference. I would like to see, and I would be happy, to see you guys in Florence as well. If you have any questions, you can ask. Or, I also have my email. If you have later any questions, feel free to ask. And I'm also available at TMU, where you can also find me if you're somewhere around there too. Yeah. Thank you.